Welcome into the DNVR Avalanche Podcast. That's Megan. I'm Rudo. Joining us from Studio C is AJ. Going to get into some of the offseason moves, full picture of the Central Division and some other things. But before we do that, obviously the news of the day, Cale Makar, cover athlete for NHL 24. Neat.
I don't think we've talked enough about how Colorado has a Ken doll for a coach, a cover model, and if Mikko Rantanen wants to tap into his influencer status and promote Trulies again next year, there's a lot of star power that we haven't fully recognized.
Hopefully they're a little more dedicated to the craft than Mikko was to selling the Trulies.
That didn't last
long. Yeah, I mean it's a cool honor. AJ, do you think hockey players actually care about being the cover athlete?
Sure.
Okay.
I think it's a cool thing. I mean, especially with more and more athletes growing up where video games are like an accepted part of mainstream culture now. Like when we were kids, if you played video games, you were a social pariah. And nowadays, like who doesn't own a gaming system of some kind? Like everybody kind of dabbles a little bit in some of this stuff. And as those kids grow up and become pro players, I think that it will be a really cool thing for them. And I also think that there would be more excitement from players just because it is a thing that a lot of these guys have probably grown up playing the NHL games. And, a guy like Makar is right in that age range where he probably was pretty familiar with it as a kid. And so being on the cover is a cool thing for a guy like that.
Is this just another award that Nathan MacKinnon is never going to win?
Yeah.
Right next to the empty space where his Hart Trophy should go, I guess. But funnily enough, MacKinnon never been on it. Makar, the third Av ever to be on it. With Forsberg was properly on it in 98, and then Joe Sakic was technically on it in 2004. Neat. Those are all my fun facts for the NHL cover. That's all I got. Will be interesting to see. For the record, I've already had multiple people ask me about this. As far as the NHL games are concerned, there isn't really any kind of curse. I know in football that's like a thing. I looked it up this morning. Most players who are on the cover that year have a fine season, so I wouldn't worry too much about that.
I've heard they're introducing Slurpee mode to NHL 24.
Slurpee mode.
Instead of having Gatorade bottles on the bench,
hell
you
yeah.
get 7-Eleven Slurpees.
Perfect. Really fuels Cale Makar. Okay. Should we actually move into the topic of today? That being the off-season moves of the NHL. Now that most of them are done, like there's pretty much Kane is still out there, and that's about it. But anyway, where do you want to start? Should we start with the Central Division moves, or do you want to start with the best and worst moves overall?
We'll start overall. We'll drill down onto it and get more Avalanche focused as we go.
All right, fair enough. I'll start with the worst move, which I think was an easy one for me. 3 years of Ryan Reeves at over $1 million feels really dumb.
Yeah, and he's obviously bad, but this is like feeling like Curtis McDermott is the worst contract in the NHL. Like you're talking about a really low impact guy here who's not going to play very much. So I think it's a terrible contract in terms of the fact that they gave him 3 years.
Yeah,
like that's stupid. But if at any point they decide that they're done with it, it's not hard for them to move on from it. Either they bury it or they buy it out. And he's just not going to play very much for them. So the Reeves, like Ryan Reeves is a bad NHL player, but he's not in the league because of what he does hockey wise. He's in the league because of all the other stuff, the size and the physicality and the quote unquote intimidation factor. All that stuff is why he's still hanging around. But I just don't. Yeah, I mean it's a bad contract.
Yeah, You're right. It's not going to have a huge impact when he is the player that he inevitably is and doesn't provide much positive impact on the ice. But yeah, at over $1 million, I think it was 1.35. Yes, you can get rid of that, but it's not a contract that you can just bury at any time if you want to. And then, like you said, the 3 years is just nonsense to me for that guy. Like, regardless of how the contract plays out, committing to that for 3 years just makes no sense to me.
I think in looking at other offseason moves from the past couple off seasons, one of the separating factors has been which teams are able to move on from tough contracts that they're anchored to. And there are a few teams that have been unable to do that because they are imprisoned by some of these difficult contracts. Yeah. And this strikes me as one, but it's a mistake that's being made in real time and hasn't been learned from the mistakes of others that I think is going to be difficult, because there is something to be said for, as AJ mentioned, the quote unquote intimidation factor. There are players, I think, in today's NHL that are more multidimensional and can bring about the physical, gritty component that Reeves is valued for, but also bring other things to the table. And that's what I think makes it difficult to stomach this contract coming about right now.
Yeah. And obviously the Toronto situation there is quite complicated for a number of reasons. Them moving on from Kyle Dubas and trying to, find an identity as a team, I suppose, is kind of the words they used. So I don't know if Ryan Reeves is the right identity, but
I don't even think it's the worst contract Toronto gave this summer, because that David Kampf deal
it's not good.
Awful. It's awful. I think the Kampf contract is right next to Luke Schen's deal. Like, did you have a gun to your head? Like, what is this? What are you doing? Why does this exist? Like, were you like, does he have incriminating evidence against you? Like, the fact that deal took place it just blows my mind, because the commitment, the money and the commitment to it, that's a little bit harder to get out of that contract, and he gives you a little bit more than what Reeves does on the ice, but that guy is a really low end NHL player, and they made it was like a 4-year commitment to him at 2.4. To me, that was one of the more shocking contracts that I just. Okay, Toronto, cool moves, guys.
Toronto struggling out here. If you are a diehard, we did release some of these topics as a round table today on the website. So if you want to go read up more of our thoughts on these things, go check that out at thednvr.com. You can go look it up there. Megan, where are you at with your worst deal?
I guess I didn't pick a worst. I picked a least favorite, but not because it ranks as the worst, but because it meant that Jason Zucker wasn't going to be a Colorado Avalanche player.
Okay.
And I think what made it difficult, and I described this in the piece, is that it came in just a little bit rich, that even if this is a player that multiple teams are interested in come the deadline, because it is just that 1-year deal, it is going to make it just a bit more challenging to accommodate a player like Zucker, who I think had an incredible season last year and is going to make a wonderful, versatile depth middle six player for any team that he's on. I think the multiple tools in his toolkit do make him a valuable player, but it kind of set a new precedent for what this type of player is going to cost you moving forward, that I think is going to be difficult for more teams beyond just the Avalanche to keep up with.
It was what, 5.3?
5.3. That's more than Duchene and O'Reilly money. And it's a little shocking, but you look at the 1 year and you also kind of rationalize it.
For sure. So, I mean, if you look at the 5.3, you get to the deadline, there's something like 2 million of that left, half retained. So you need about $1 million in space at the deadline to probably find him, assuming Arizona retains. A lot of teams aren't going to have that much money this year based on what we've seen so far this offseason.
Because of other one-year contracts that they lock themselves into with other players.
Exactly. And as Chad is mentioning, for your Toronto's case, you're still over the cap, so they've got a whole other mess of situation going on there. AJ, are you in the same boat? Is Zucker, I guess, can the Avs find a way to make someone like a Zucker a target come the trade deadline, or is it going to be too rich for their blood?
Yeah, I think they could. I think some of that is going to be heavily dependent on the seasons that they get out of guys like Miles Wood,
Yeah.
and obviously Jonathan Drouin, because if Drouin does not work out, we're right back to talking about, oh, the Avs need the sixth forward. They need that fourth wing for their top six. Now, I do think that there would be some interest in a guy like Zucker to come in and maybe play more of like a middle six, like he can move around second and third line as well. Because if you were to have a third line of Miles Wood, Ross Colton, and Jason Zucker going into a postseason series, that's a pretty good line.
Yeah.
That's something like that would be intriguing. Obviously, we're expecting Nikolai Kovalenko to be on the roster by that point. So how do all those pieces fit? But yeah, I do think Zucker is a guy that will be an interesting name to follow this season for the deadline for the Avalanche, especially if Jonathan Drouin does not pan out.
Live up to the hype for
I
sure.
think Arizona,
No.
will be inclined to get as much of a return as possible too in recognizing the value of this player. I think that is some of what brought value to bringing him to Arizona specifically is the potential for a big return come the deadline, because they are not likely in a compete window for a very long postseason if they can get that far. So I'm sure they're going to want to make it as painful as possible for anybody on the opposite side of that. And I think that'll make him an interesting name to keep an eye out then come March timeframe.
Assuming a decent season, the price has got to at least start with a first, probably. So,
yeah, I mean, it might be like that might be the cost, like a
Sure.
first round pick. If the Avs wanted to get wild and they wanted to use that 2026 second that they've got that they're allowed to play with now,
it's a
I think
miracle
that
they've
would be
held on to it this long.
I think that would be a price that would make a lot of sense, where they continue to keep their firsts, but they stay using those second and thirds for NHL players and not trying to mess with. Well, maybe we can break a decade-long trend of being able to draft and develop those guys. Don't bother.
Yeah, I mean, they could always do it the other way, where they draft them and then trade the prospect for the record. But that would be a ways down the line for 2026.
It worked for Drew Hellison.
Yep. Count it where it is. The other side of it, some of the best moves in the NHL. AJ, who knocked it out the park?
For me, I really liked. I mean, I only wanted to do one for the roundtable, so I put Michael Bunting in Carolina. But I actually really liked. It was the combination Michael Bunting and Dmitry Orlov for the Hurricanes. The Hurricanes didn't need another defenseman.
Yeah.
God, no, they didn't need another one. But there's also something to be said for this is who you are. This is your bread and butter. This is what you do. That just lean into it and go and get a guy that is going to fit your identity at a really high level in Orlov. And it might be kind of pricey money wise right now, but it's only 2 years. So it's not a major commitment for them. They'll get really good hockey out of him, and they don't have to really worry about an aging curve or anything like that. And I really like the Bunting addition because they are that team that they live and die with their kind of high-skilled grinder types. And I think Bunting sort of fits that. He's kind of taken the torch from Zach Parise a little bit as the ultra try-hard that also has enough skill to be an impact guy in a top six role. And they just need more of that. They just need more skill. But they don't sacrifice any of what makes them with a guy like Bunting, because he is that tryhard. He is going to work hard. He is going to get after it. He is going to bring that element that is classic Carolina to the ice. But he can also give you 25 goals. And so I think I do think that is especially with no Svechnikov until later on in the season. I think that's one of those signings that I'm into the combination of what Carolina did there for relatively shorter term and reasonable money on both of those guys. So I think they take a meaningful step forward with them.
Here's my question. Not that I mind the Orlov move. Carolina is sitting on 8 defensemen that played at least 60 games last year.
Yeah, the Orlov thing is great. It was then turning around and getting Tony DeAngelo and Caleb Jones after, where you're like, all right, what the hell is happening right now? Like, are there major injuries that you guys haven't announced that we just don't know about yet? Because right now, I'm sitting here looking at the Avs going, you should be offering up a pick for one of those guys. Don't let them go through waivers because you won't be high enough in the priority order to snag one. Go and get a Jalen Chatfield right now if you can. Like, go get that guy. You know, even a Dylan Coughlin would be good and would fill that kind of spot on the Avs blue line that we know uh, really they need to add a dude there.
Yeah. We've talked a lot about how Jack Johnson probably makes more sense as a 7 than a 6, but is what it is for the time being. Megan, best move, favorite move?
I like in general the combination of the last 2 off seasons for Ottawa and the direction that they're going. I compared it heavily alongside what Detroit has done, 2 teams that are directly battling each other in their division as well. And I think Ottawa has done more to move the needle. Obviously, Tarasenko being what the name that sort of marks this is a bigger, splashier offseason for them. But I think that it's rounded out their forward group in a big way. I think that he took a very friendly contract to make it happen. And so Ottawa is going to get a really terrific hockey player in Tarasenko, and they're going to have a year to see how much more forward movement they can jolt the Ottawa Senators with because of this.
I think the interesting part is mechanically Tarasenko is more of a goal scorer. You're looking at a team that moved on from DeBrincat. You can kind of see the one-to-one replacement there. Obviously, you know, DeBrincat's smaller, a little bit more agile. Tarasenko hasn't quite been at the same level this past couple of years, but you throw him in, potential 30-goal scorer for Ottawa, right in their top 6. It's starting to get into that time for Ottawa where it's like, okay, they need to make the jump. It's time to become a playoff team, or you've got to figure something out because this is not working. I don't know if I believe they can do it. I do like Tarasenko, though.
I think there's still some questions for the entirety of the team that make it hard for me to say that this changes the expectation for Ottawa this season, but I can appreciate the forward movement. But like you say, there's a time and a window to maximize too some of the young talent that they are trying to build around. And it's a little bit tough, but I think it's a better position, and they've placed themselves in a better position than a Detroit comparatively.
I agree with that. I think Detroit is a little all over the place, just generally. Beyond that, mine, it kind of leads us into our next topic, which will be more Central Division moves. My favorite move was the Matt Duchene deal. Dallas gets Matt Duchene for 1 year for $3 million. There's no risk long term there. Obviously, Duchene could get injured or whatever, but at $3 million, it's a great price point for a guy who has been pretty consistently a 55-plus point guy for the majority of his career, that drops into a team that is in perpetual go-for-it mode anyway. They're trying to win right now until their core, well, the half of their core ages out, as you're starting to really get up there in age with guys like Pavelski, and even Ben and Sagan are now into their mid-ish 30s. I think it's just an easy slam dunk of a middle 6 producer for them, even potentially a second-line producer for them, to help bolster that behind the guys like Robertson and obviously Benz. If he can keep up what he did last year, Dallas starts to look like certainly on the forward side, a very, very strong hockey team.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to argue with the Duchene in Dallas. I mean, all the upside is obvious, and there's very, very little downside. So I think that's probably the. I think it's an easy answer for, one of the best moves of the offseason. So on paper, it'll be interesting to see what role they use him in.
Sure.
And like where he ends up, because their top 9's actually pretty good. And like, do they end up with a third line if they want to, depending on how they want to handle Wyatt Johnston? Like, do they end up with Matt Duchene as their third line center, or does he play more like a like he did in Nashville, does he end up on the wing? Um, next to a Wyatt Johnston or even next to a Rupe Hintz if they wanted. I think that will be how he gets used will be a really interesting thing to see in Dallas, because it's great when you have all those guys, right? But if Matt Duchene ends up playing 15 minutes a night, he might not be very successful in that role,
And he's a
because he's never done
35-point
it before.
guy down there or whatever. Yeah, it's a whole lot.
Yeah,
different.
we've seen some guys actually really struggle in the past, where they do get into these stacked forward cores, and they don't have the puck touches, and they don't have, 22 shifts per game to make something happen, and they've never had to do that in the NHL. So it can be a struggle. So I think their usage will be important, but he's a good enough player. It's really, really hard to see that deal ending up a bust for the Stars.
I think where it helps too is in talking about the difference in role that Duchene will take on. I think part of the issue in Nashville was being relied on for too much. And I think that pressure got to Duchene and led to postseason performance issues. And this isn't to dunk on the playoff hockey that he's talked about wanting to play, but with Dallas, I look to players like Sagan and Ben and Pavelski as being the grizzled veteran players with that postseason experience who can process that side of the game mentally so well that I think it'll take some necessary pressure off Duchene to just be a little less of what was expected of him in Nashville and more of just the star. But he doesn't have to be quite the same leader or the veteran presence that I think was also expected of him in Nashville. And maybe that difference in role will allow him to feel a little more comfortable on that stage when the lights do get brighter in the postseason.
I do think it'll be interesting exactly how that team shapes up, because spoiler alert, I was doing a lot of the pre-work for our middle six show. Dallas I'm not even sure what their middle six looks like. You could take any of the dudes I placed on their fourth line and put them in their middle six, really, if you wanted to, depending on how you're shaping the lineup. So their forward core really is very, very strong and extremely flexible as well. But is Duchene the piece that'll put him over the top? I'm not so convinced of that, but I do think it is still one of the better moves of this offseason, which is interesting. You're talking about Tarasenko, a move's done in early August. Duchene done on July 1st. You can make it work either way. You can make good moves right away. You can be patient and make the good move well into the offseason. So I do think it is interesting to see the multiple approaches there. But on that note, we are brought to you by Breckenridge Distillery. They got a couple of contests going on right now that you can get into. On the Broncos end, they're having the Battle of the Broncos blends. It's Ed McCaffrey versus Alfred Williams. You can go vote on your favorite one right now and win Breckenridge Distillery Broncos swag. You can enter at breckenridgedistillery.com/bourbon of Denver Broncos. Go over there today, get your votes in, see if you can win some stuff. And more importantly, they're also doing the Broncos Bourbon hashtag, where you can win 2 tickets to the Breckenridge Bourbon Whiskey Suite for the Broncos game on New Year's Eve. So if you want to go be in a suite at a Broncos game for New Year's, make sure you go over to Instagram, post your favorite Broncos photos with the hashtag Broncos Bourbon. They will narrow down the favorite options on December 1st. Excuse me. Jump in there. Get on Instagram, use the Broncos Bourbon hashtag, go to breckenridgedistillery.com/bourbon of Denver Broncos. Put your entries in today, get yourself some delicious bourbon, and win some cool Broncos stuff. Also brought to you by the folks over at Kind Love. They've been around forever, the OGs since 2010 as a dispensary here in Colorado. You can use the DNVR code with them to get 25% off all of their in-store stuff, including flour, gummies, their turbo sticks, all that good stuff. You can also use that QR code on screen or go to kindlove.com for online ordering if that's your thing. Tons of amazing products out from Kind Love. It's all farm to table. They grow their own stuff. They ship it to their own stores, locations, and then you buy it from them. So they know what they're doing, to say the least, whatever product it is you prefer. I know here at DNVR, we got people who love the gummies. We got people who love the turbo sticks. I'm not into any of the fancy stuff. Just give me a joint and we're good. That's all I need. So get it all at Kind Love dispensaries today with the DNVR code to get 25% off. Second period of the DNVR Avalanche Podcast, getting into the actual Central Division. Who botched it in the Central Division, and why is it Nashville?
I don't know what the Preds are doing. I wrote this in the roundtable, but I totally understand brand new GM in Barry Trotz and coming in and wanting to kind of shed some of the dead weight of the previous regime, deciding that hey, these are not my contracts, these are not my mistakes. I can live with whatever dead money. Giving away Ryan Johansson and then buying out Matt Duchene, I get that. We've seen Bill Guerin make it work despite heavy cap limitations. We've seen him make it work in Minnesota. So Trotz coming in and kind of immediately starting to reshape the roster, cool. New GMs do that stuff all the time. Hard decisions get made. They were big boy choices, and good for him. That's all good and well. And then I just can't stop thinking about, when I think about the Preds offseason, I think about the conversation that he had with Megan and Jesse on the red carpet at the NHL Awards, which, he said, when you guys asked about Ryan Johansson, it was, oh, well, that this is just a better opportunity for him, and we wanted to get younger, and we wanted to get a little bit different. And their answer on getting younger was to then go into free agency and sign 3 players over the age of 30 already in Ryan O'Reilly, Gustav Nyquist, and Luke Shen to multi-year deals. And Ryan O'Reilly now effectively replaces Ryan Johansson or Matt Duchene, kind of depending on how they want to align things. Yeah, he becomes one of their centers, and he gets a 4-year deal. And it's fair to just wonder why. Like, the Nyquist deal should be pretty tradable, either at this deadline or over the summer or whatever. Like, if that, if he plays well,
2 years is perfectly fine. Yeah.
Yeah, it's not impossible to think that teams will be more willing to take on second years of contracts when the cap is expected to take the rise that it is, which is one reason why teams were not taking on guys under contract already.
Yep.
But even with that in mind, what's the point here? Why, if you're trying to get younger, why are you making commitments like that? 4 years for Ryan O'Reilly. This is not the Ryan O'Reilly of his prime. He has been in serious decline for 2 seasons in a row, to the point where I had somebody in the NHL tell me at the start of this offseason, if you gave Ryan O'Reilly a 4-year deal and he falls apart in year 1, you are completely fucked. His words. So Nashville gave him a 4-year deal like a week after that conversation happened. It was baffling. What is the point? That's not a Jason Zucker hey, if disaster strikes in Dallas, if disaster strikes and Ottinger gets hurt or underperforms severely and they miss the postseason, Matt Duchene is like the number 1 guy at the deadline that gets moved, right? Like, the 1-year deals are always, you're going to say, hey, if things just don't go well, we always have the deadline as a fallback option to try to recoup something out of this. There isn't any of that with Ryan O'Reilly. A 4-year contract, if he declines enough, nobody's taking that on. I don't know what the plan is in Nashville. It's just more of I don't see a vision there. I don't understand what they're hoping to get outside of maybe some culture shift. But that doesn't, a culture shift alone doesn't make you more competitive. It doesn't make that a valuable contract. It does not in any way move the needle towards either getting into a rebuild or getting back into trying to push for a wild card spot.
That's the problem for me. The question is, what is Nashville trying to be? Because on one hand, you're looking at Gustav Nyquist on your top line. And don't get me wrong, Gustav Nyquist's a fine hockey player, probably would be in most teams' middle 6, maybe even second line. But if you're trying to run a lineup with Gustav Nyquist as a top line winger, you're probably not a playoff team. And you look down their lineup, a lot of their middle 6 ends up being, and we'll get into this on Wednesday, young guys that they want to take the next steps. Great. Ryan O'Reilly doesn't fit into that at all. And then on the back end, you still have an aging Roman Josi, an aging Ryan McDonough. Even Tyson Barrie's not young anymore. you're kind of stuck in the middle, and instead of trying to get yourself out of the middle, Ryan O'Reilly keeps you in the middle.
I think
Go ahead, sir.
what was most confusing to me about talking with Barry Trotz is even his explanation of where Nashville is at right now and trying to go. To me, and this could just be my interpretation of what he said, it didn't even sound like he felt their window was right now, and that what he was trying to maximize. It felt like there is this young core that they're trying to build around for the future, and this was something that was being pinned down the line. But as of that Monday, that also included Matt Duchene, so that changed in a couple days' time in terms of what his vision was. With Andrew Brunette, they definitely want to get faster, so the on-ice product is going to have a slightly different look, but the personnel that they're looking to do it is confusing with Ryan O'Reilly for the reasons you've mentioned. He had a transformative effect on St. Louis, but that was 2019 Ryan O'Reilly, and that's just not the same player. And it's not even like, I don't even agree that it's been a serious decline, but he cannot stay healthy, and it has been different injuries. Some of that is just very unlucky, but a lot of that also comes with the territory when you have an aging player. And 4 years of that is difficult to take a gamble on when his health has been the reason he hasn't been able to consistently produce at the same clip that he once did before. And it's hard to then imagine that that's going to just change in the same way that we're hoping we get Ryan Johansson of the 2021 season. There is a lot of gamble that's happening there. And I think I share the same confusion in wondering what the vision is for Nashville. They have two excellent goaltenders. And if the window isn't right now for them, why sit on two extremely talented goaltenders? You have one with budding promise in Askarov and one who's good right now in Saros. Yep. It doesn't make a lot of sense for them to basically hoard some of the excellent goaltending if they're not trying to be competitive right now. We've talked about the value of a veteran presence. Eric Johnson going to Buffalo is sort of how we've rationalized why Buffalo would be interested in that. And perhaps some of the qualities that Ryan O'Reilly has as a leader are meant to rub off on some of those young players you described in the middle six. But even then, it feels hard to see where Nashville made themselves significantly better this offseason.
When you go out and get veteran leadership, I think Cogliano in Colorado is a perfect example of this, Darren Helm. Those are guys that are leaders in the locker room. When you're expecting those guys to go out and be, in O'Reilly's case, arguably he needs to be their best forward this season for them to really be competitive as far as playoffs are concerned. It's not very often that works out well for a veteran type that's aging out, that you're bringing in to be a mentor to some of these younger kids, and then expecting them to perform on the ice as well. It's a big ask. I'll leave it that way. We do have to move on here. Bad moves in the Central? Either of you have any that aren't Nashville?
This is quick because it was the lack of moves, but also the lack of ability to make any moves that is St. Louis. And sure. When I talk about being anchored to tough contracts, I think of the scene from The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air where Will Smith is in a house by himself and he's just looking around at an empty room. And to me, that is Jordan Kyrou and Robert Thomas. And St. Louis has put themselves in such a difficult position with max contracts, very little cap space to play around with. And they've shipped off important pieces like Ryan O'Reilly and Tarasenko. And they are so handcuffed to what they're even able to do. I don't think St. Louis has improved at all. I don't think that they really can do very much. And what was once one of my favorite matchups to watch with the Avs year by year because they get a little rowdy is starting to lose a little bit of that potential in my eyes. This is going to age so poorly. Someone's going to reference this pod after a horrible game next season.
Look, the rowdiness is interesting when you're a competitive team, right? But the Avs swept them in that play, or rather, they swept them 3 years ago now, is it? Time. Doesn't matter. They had that sweep. They had a 6-game series in the Cup run. And a lot of those games felt like the Avs were just the better team. Now St. Louis is getting worse. When you're getting beat down, the rowdiness isn't as interesting. It's like, oh, you just suck and are bad. Okay, moving on. Look, one game, if St. Louis bodies the Avs, it will probably happen. Doesn't matter. Not important. AJ?
Yeah, I really don't know that there are any other outside of Nashville. I don't know that there are any moves that really jump off the page to me when I look at what the Central did, because I like most everything that Arizona did. Just with Dumba and Sucker and Bukestad and Kerfoot, like those are all like fine players.
I would put Arizona in maybe a top 10 offseason, to be honest with you. They very
Definitely.
well walked the line of going out and having pieces that they could sell while trying to sneak their way into a more competitive season.
And it took them a little bit longer than they might have liked, but getting Logan Cooley to sign and get into the NHL this year, I think, is also a really big win for them, because now they start to get an idea of what they have in him. They start to get an idea of what they have in Dylan Guenther as well this season. And instead of just rolling in and saying, "All right, good luck with all the kids," it's more like, hey, we have like a healthy mixture. The Coyotes' top 9 looks really good on paper. It looks competitive. They're not going to be an easy out this year. They're going to have to leave Mullet Arena, and they're going to have to win a few more games away from there. But I do think that they like their moves, man. They look solid, and I don't really see another team in the Central Division that I just don't get it. Maybe like giving Nick Foligno and Corey Perry $4 million a piece for Chicago
to be on their fourth line.
Yeah, because even if you try and sell it as, oh, well, at the deadline they can move them. Well, they gave them enough money that come deadline time, even if they max retain at $2 million, you're getting such limited players that for a similar price, teams might just find better options
compared
elsewhere.
to a Jason Zucker.
Exactly.
Yeah, totally. The $5.3 or $4 million, which, like, if assuming those teams max retain, which guy would you rather have? So it's almost like you look at that and you say, okay, well, that they needed to get to the cap floor, so it makes sense in that regard. But I just don't. I guess I don't. Okay, like those guys are gonna, if those guys are beyond their fourth line, they're just wasting everyone's time. So I like, even talking about those deals is maybe it's among the worst in the Central Division. It's crazy that an entire division was like, everybody did pretty well. I think the Miles Wood contract might be one of the worst ones given out in the Central Division this offseason.
Yeah, a fair point. We do want to get into the good ones. Before that, very quickly, I will say I don't think Winnipeg had a bad offseason, but it's kind of feels like an incomplete offseason, right? You still have Hellebuck at the end of his contract this year, that swirling situation. Other guys on the roster where it's like, will they, won't they? It feels incomplete.
Not having resolution on Scheifele and Hellebuck going into the season, when both have made it pretty clear that they weren't really interested in staying, it is kind of a tough spot for Cheveldayoff to be in. But the business that actually got done, I thought he did really well in the PLD deal.
Yep, agree.
I like the LA return.
Yeah, it will be interesting. We'll get into some of the good moves here in a second, including, I suspect, some of the Avs moves. But before we do that, we are brought to you by the folks over at Shady Rays. You can go get your fantastic sunglasses today at shadyrays.com. Use the DNVR code when you order, and if you get 2 pairs or more, you get 50% off your entire order. So get on it. They have dozens of different styles and polarizations. I'm sure you can find 2 pairs that you like. And the coolest part is, for the first 30 days, if you break them, lose them, or just plain don't like them, you can send them back, and they'll send you a new pair completely for free of whatever style you want. So go check them out, especially if you're a skier or snowboarder. They got goggles for you. ShadyRays.com or a brick and mortar at the Park Meadows Mall. Be sure to use the DNVR code when you do. And then when you get your new sunglasses, you can go out and hit the field, the park, the pitch, all of them, any sport with Volo. Volo is the largest social sports media company in the country. The coolest part is you play with them so that kids can play free. A bunch of the proceeds go towards specific clubs and activities and what are the things that you go to? Camps. Thank you, God. Words. Sports camps for kids around the country. So be sure to get in with Volo. You can get in right now with the Volo Pass at just $20 a month, or you can use the beta thing to test it out. It's just $10 for a month for the first 3 months. They have, like I said, pretty much every sport under the sun you can play with these guys. And they've got leagues through Lodo, Rhino, Uptown, City Park, the Highlands, Sloan's Lake, Cherry Creek, DU, Inglewood, Arvada, Aurora, Northfield, and more than that. So if you're anywhere near Denver, they have you totally covered. Head over to volosports.com/Denver today. You have fall leagues open. I want to say today might be like the last day you can sign up for fall league specifically. So get in on that right now. But if not, they have drop-ins and all sorts of easy stuff that you can get to with that Volo Pass. Use DNVR10 when you sign up for whatever you do at volosports.com/Denver to get $10 off your order. Third period of the DNVR Avalanche podcast. Top moves in the Central. We kind of already talked about the Matt Duchene one. I'll open it up to you guys. You can go non-Avs or Avs, wherever you want to go with it. Go ahead.
I kind of touched on it. I really liked the PLD deal.
Fair enough.
I felt like it would have been really easy for Winnipeg to try to focus on purely futures and try to get, we got a first-round pick and a second-round pick, and we got all this stuff, right? And instead, they get Gabe Vilardi, who's coming off, the best season of his career to date and could replace PLD as a 2C and play a similar style that PLD played. But younger with RFA years and, we'll see, right?
Has back problem.
Right. But, Vilardi, not like a bad style fit there, and a guy that could replace PLD pretty effectively as their 2C. They get a good player, a good middle six guy, and Iafallo. And then they get we'll see how it goes with Rasmus Kupari, who was a former first-round pick that just hadn't really found a home in LA's lineup, but should have a more robust opportunity in Winnipeg. But those three guys added to what was already a pretty good forward core. They buy out Blake Wheeler. They bring back Nemestikov. They add Niederreiter at the deadline, who has another year on his deal for this season. And you have Adam Lowry as your 3C and Scheifele as your 1C. You're talking about once again a pretty good forward core. You get Cole Perfetti back from injury, and then your defense remains not very good. And Connor Hellebuyck needs to be God mode for this team to really be a scary team. But that's a team that I would pick them pretty comfortably ahead of Nashville right now. And going into the offseason, I thought there was a chance that this would be Winnipeg's bottoming out. So I really do like the work that Cheveldayoff did in Winnipeg this summer. I think it's incomplete, as you mentioned. Not having resolution to Scheifele and Hellebuyck is a problem. But hey, if they end up making a playoff run, they win a round. Maybe Hellebuyck and Scheifele are like, all right, I see where this is going. This makes sense. Maybe I'll give this a go. Yep. Maybe I'll sign up for another deal on this. And I think that door could still be open. It's probably unlikely, but you never know how these things go with guys who have been in place a long time, and all of a sudden that place is like, oh, this looked like it was terrible, and now it's good and fun, and now I want to be here. So I like what the Jets did.
Fair enough. Megan, is there one of you picked out?
It's not anything we haven't talked about. Duchene stood out. I like the Vilardi return for the Jets in the PLD deal. And so in looking at the overarching view and seeing how the Titans of the East moved all of their chips to the center around the deadline last year, I think that's why looking at the Central Division specifically and not having tons of blockbuster moves to evaluate is because of the approach that a lot of the Central Division teams, especially the ones at the top, took has been to more so gradually build and not count on any sort of one act of desperation or
Yeah.
one big move to change the course of the roster. And I think that's where we're seeing the aftermath of this is in the offseason, where teams who took a chance on a rental, especially in the East, had to lose those rentals and then replace players. Whereas with the Central and the players or the teams at the top of that specifically, I think it was a lot more around the fringes that the teams had to replenish. And so there hasn't been quite the same blockbuster move, other than I do think the Duchene one's pretty splashy compared to some of the others.
About as big as you're going to get, yeah.
And I think it is a reflection of where the Central Division top teams are at, including the Colorado Avalanche. You know, Ryan Johansson, Miles Wood, Ross Colton, they're not necessarily the biggest names of the offseason. And I think that affects a pretty significant part of the roster, but it just doesn't feel to the same degree as in Ottawa getting Tarasenko and some of the other teams like Detroit, honestly, taking swings left and right yet again for another offseason. I think it's just a reflection of where the Central is at and where the teams that the Avs need to look to beat stack in the scheme of things.
Yeah, I generally agree. The one thing I will say is I think the Avs' Jonathan Drouin move has the potential to be as impactful as a Tarasenko, as someone like that, if it works out. Now, obviously, there's a whole lot of chance that it doesn't work out that well. But if we're talking about good business, if we're talking about the Avs, it's just such an easy upside swing for Colorado with Drouin that even if it doesn't work out so well that he's a 60-point guy, so what? If he's a 40-point guy, that's still crazy good value for a dude you're paying $850K for this season.
I do think I'm with you. I think other moves that really stood out to me, they're going to be bad, so nobody's going to really care about it. But putting Taylor Hall next to Connor Bedard, I think that's going to be fun. I've liked what Arizona did, but Minnesota, I think, has a chance to the deal that they gave Gustafsson.
Sure.
25 years old. It's a 3-year deal, just under $4 million. If he goes out and has a similar season as what I would expect is their full-time starter, or at least shaded as their number one, and taking the reins from Fleury, I think that could be one of those deals, kind of like with the Avs with Georgiev, where you're looking at it and saying they got a really good number one goaltender at a good age for locked up for the next few years at a really, really fair price. And I think with Gustafsson, there's that upside there. Could be huge for them, especially that contract will go in the final year of that deal, will be in the first year on the other side of the Parise Suter buyouts being really painful. And so that could provide really wonderful value for them and kind of set them up for, if Marco Rossi has a big breakout, if an Adam Beckman has a big breakout, some of their young guys, Carson Lambos or Kalen Addison, Brock Faber on the back end, those guys, if those guys have big breakouts, they could have a really cost efficient number one goaltender in that year, depending on where the rest of that roster is. They could be using those savings and then the new cap space that the league will have created, and then what they're getting back out of being on the other side of the Parise Suter deals. They could be a real sleeping giant on the other end of it. And so I really liked that deal for the upside that it presented with Gustafsson as more of a long-term thinking.
Yeah, and as you mentioned, Minnesota has to think in that way given the Parise deals. Not that they aren't a decent team, probably a playoff team as is.
Yeah.
But it's really 2 years away from when they really start to push because of cap increases and the majority of the buyouts falling off. Other than that, anything you two want to add on the Avs? Whether I pick a deal, is there one you like, one you don't like? It all is. We'll see.
I mean, it feels impossible not to be really excited about the possibility of Jonathan Drouin.
Sure.
I think I'm least excited about Ryan Johansson because I think he's the closest one to just being washed.
Sure.
And I said before they got him, he was a low end option. I feel that way now. I still understand why they did it and still think getting him totally for free and at $4 million, hey, fair enough. But I do worry that that's not going to be there. But the Ross Colton one, man, I really do think that is that's a banger of a deal. And I don't think we'll look back on it like we do the Devon Taves deal, but because Devon Taves ended up being a top 10 player at his position, I don't
Unless
feel like
Ross Colton
that's
goes out and puts up 80 points this year.
yeah, like that's the kind of thing that it would need for it to reach that level. But I think it could be another one of those deals that we look back on in a couple of years and say, "Oh man, that was a real steal of a deal there." Because I'm a big believer in Ross Colton, and I'm a big believer that he is just what the doctor ordered for the Avalanche. He's skating wise, he's not going to be like the most fleet of foot perfect fit, but his competitiveness and where the areas where the Avalanche lacked last season are major areas of strength for Ross Colton. And as we've seen with the analytics over the last few years, guys who drive play and are weaker defenders still have more game to game impact than guys who are stronger defenders and don't drive play.
Yeah.
So you're talking about the potential of being a pretty high impact guy in Ross Colton. Um, I just
Love
think
it.
that's a 4x4. It's a pretty rich deal given where Colton's career has been so far. But again, the same thing with Gustafsson in Minnesota. By the last year of that contract, we could be looking around, sitting there saying, "I wish they'd added another year or two to this deal."
Yep. Megan?
You wrote about Kovalenko,
I did.
think. And
Yeah.
it's the combination of what they've done with the college free agents of last year and the potential payoff from someone like Sam Malinsky being something that could be intriguing and very economic if Malinsky can play even like a 7th, 8th man NHL role at any point for the Avs. I think that becomes a really efficient way to find a player to fill that role that isn't a Curtis McDermott type and isn't coming in at $1 million.
Yep.
And then the other is signing Kovalenko and seeing that hope on the horizon is another way to maximize some of what the Avs have invested in these young players. If there is an NHL role that's also awaiting Kovalenko at the end of this, which is what all of that points to. Those are moves that are kind of done. Like, obviously, Kovalenko is someone that they drafted for a reason, so this didn't necessarily come out of nowhere, but the future thinking of the past is now coming to fruition, and I'm excited to see how that pays off for the Avalanche this upcoming season.
I just look at the Avs roster construction, and I get they're not done. They'll probably add a PTO or a late signing or whatever, but they have very intentionally set up their roster this year to have a soft spot in it where you would slot Nikolai Kovalenko in. Obviously, when Kovalenko gets here, he's got to play, he's got to do well, yada, yada, yada. But it seems really easy for Colorado to just drop him in right now.
Do we have very much historical precedent for a guy coming from the KHL at the end of the season and jumping into the NHL right away? Because normally the guys that come from the KHL will, like Pavel Francouz, for example, he signed in like April or something. Like it was like things were done, and everybody had kind of moved on and was whatever. And that's when those guys usually sign. You don't see very many situations where a guy who's expected to be a top player on his KHL team has already made it known to all parties involved at the end of this season, I'm going over to North America and I plan to play in the NHL at the end of the year. I wonder if we've got any kind of historical precedent. Maybe I'll mess around today and see if I can find one. So I think having the trying to properly gauge immediate impact, like when he first comes across this in this upcoming season, is almost impossible to do. Maybe he'll already be in shape and in rhythm and all that, and he just drops right into the lineup. He gets the trust of the coaches. He gets a role that he can sink his teeth into, and it all goes really well. And he's an impact guy for them in a deep playoff run. You know, he's in the NHL for 2 months, and the guy raises the Stanley Cup, and it's a dream story for him. You know, like that's best case, right?
Yep.
Worst case is he's nursing an injury or something. He comes across, it's a total disaster, and we're wondering like, can this guy even play in the league? And then the next season happens where it ends up in kind of a Ben Myers like disappointment,
Yeah.
where you're like, boy, we really wanted to see more out of that. The truth is probably somewhere in between. Like the reality will probably be somewhere in between there. But I do wonder, like, because his season will finish post deadline. Like they have to make the major roster choices with him in mind of, hey, we have promised this guy a spot. We plan to play him. We think he's going to be on our roster. We think he's going to be ready to help us on day one. But you have no fallback option. And at that point, with you add Kovalenko, you've really started to stack the what if questions pretty high on your roster. You know, what if Johansson doesn't work out? What if Jonathan Duran doesn't work out? What if Ross Colton is only as good as he was last season and not the guy from 2 seasons ago? What if Jack Johnson can't handle that role? What if Josh Manson doesn't stay healthy? You know, those are all the major question marks coming into this next season. What if Alexander Georgiev takes a step back? You know, those are all the things that they're facing. And then you add in Nikolai Kovalenko of, we have no idea what to expect here. And you don't normally see NHL teams that think that they have a chance to win a Stanley Cup go into a season with this level of uncertainty at so many important spots. So I do think that the Kovalenko wild card is going to be a really fascinating subplot of the season, and one of the real interesting aspects of the trade deadline, because say all the primary forwards are healthy, and that third line right wing spot continues to be an uncertainty at the deadline. Maybe you do go and get a Jason Zucker if you have an opportunity to do that. But if you decide not to, under the guise of Nikolai Kovalenko being the guy there, and he comes in and is a total flop, you've done yourself a total disservice rolling the dice with that and not getting a proven commodity like a Zucker, because you were hoping that this kid from the KHL was going to fill that spot adequately on the fly with 0 NHL games played. So this is not like when Cale Makar came into the NHL and left UMass, and it was a really easy, like, they have an obvious spot on the defense for him. We think this guy could be one of the very best players at his position, and pretty quickly. We're weak on our blue line. We've got an opening here. We'll just see how this goes. This is, and that wasn't a team that thought it was winning the Stanley Cup that season. This is a team that thinks it's winning the Stanley Cup every year now. And so taking that level of uncertainty into it, I think is an interesting decision. It feels like every time I say something is interesting, people read that to believe that I'm questioning the front office or whatever. I just think that it's a roll of the dice, and every front office in the NHL has to take its chances somewhere on the roster. Last season, Colorado did it with their center depth. This season, they're doing it with their defensive depth and some of their forward depth. Actual depth, though. And Kovalenko being in that mix is an interesting subplot that I'm excited to see how it plays out, because I can't recall a situation like this in recent NHL history.
And I think the front office has earned some trust. It doesn't mean they're absolved of all culpability, but the risk they took with goaltending last year really paid off. And there is some reinforcement too that they're looking to build around not just Kovalenko, but in seeking players like Fredrik Olofsson. I imagine that is built-in reinforcement. Ben Myers coming in at $775 for another season. That's just another reinforcement that could satisfy a fourth line, maybe third line role if needed. If he continues to develop the defensive side of his game as he was last season, And then the other part of it is the Evan Rodriguez component, and that is a player that comes in late in the offseason, right before training camp, that ends up having such a terrific fit. The Rodriguez fit demanded so much more of him than I think we would have wanted from Evan Rodriguez, but it also is a testament to the stylistic fit that the pro scouting department is seeing in players like a Duchene, that they choose for a reason. They seek out that type of player. And if the Avs front office can, and alongside their pro scouting staff, find another player that fits as well as Rodriguez did, that's just one less hole to worry so much about, whether that be Kovalenko filling that role or an Evan Rodriguez type that comes in later in the offseason.
As far as offseason moves are concerned, I think the front office deserves a whole lot more than some credit. I mean, they have been nails every single offseason with making correct moves to push this team in the right direction. If you want to have some problems with trade deadlines, I think there's some validity there. Beyond just this one, the last 6 years, the one deadline they got right, the won the cup. The rest, really a whole lot of not great deadlines there. So justifiable if you don't like their deadlines. But as far as offseason moves are concerned, I don't know how you can't say they haven't knocked it out of the park. So I really do think it has set up for an extremely interesting season for Colorado, which, we're probably 2-3 weeks away from still starting to break down expectations and things like that. But we do have to get out of here for today. Before we do, come join us this Friday, 6 p.m. down here at the bar. Megan and I will be doing a live show. If you want to come shoot the stuff with us, just talk hockey and things like that, we'll be hanging out after the live show in the bar, and you can listen to the show in the bar too, so you can come be a part of it, be a part of the audience. 6 p.m. on Friday at the DNVR bar, where you can grab yourself a Mountain Beach from Breckenridge Brewery. Highly recommend for a summer beer. Get it while it lasts, all right? It's pretty cool today. It was pretty cool yesterday. Who knows how long the summer weather is going to stick around. Go get yourself a Mountain Beach from Breckenridge Brewery while you can. You can get it at your local liquor store, too, if you go to the Breck Beer Locator online at breckbrew.com. Any final thoughts from you two, or are we done? We looking done. All right. We're out of here for the day. AJ and I will be back tomorrow talking who knows what, but we got you covered. Until then, we'll see you on the next one.